law school program on negotiations, so this trip was important for me because of the myriad disciplines involved here. What I thought I'd do is skim rapidly on more or less 50 years of Arab, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, just to, for all of us to be on the same page in terms of what we are talking about, and then broaden up the discussion on the future, on what's possible, what's doable, what's desirable in terms of the interests of Israel. I'm speaking here, as an Israeli Jewish patriot. So I don't venture to present a too, I wouldn't say balanced, but I'm going to base myself on facts and on the course of events that led to the situation we are at right now in this intractable conflict. But of course, there might be completely opposite standpoints and analysis of what I'm going to present to you. So very rapidly, let's start with 1947. We could start anywhere, any time before that, but I think that this marks the first concept of a two-state solution when the United Nations General Assembly took a decision, number 181, of within the former British mandate to be ending soon. Then there would be two states established: one Jewish state and the other one an Arab state. On what you see here. And 1948, of course, the war of independence for us, the Nakba for the Palestinians. We do declare statehood, and Israel is being attacked by about 6-7 armies of Arab countries, neighboring countries. The war results in a divided Jerusalem, where there's Jewish Jerusalem and an Arab Jerusalem held by the Jordanians, and a body of about 650,000 Palestinian refugees that make today more or less 5 million, with their descendants and each household siblings, etc. The war came to an end with the signing of the armistice lines in 1949, and what you see here is the line that was then delineated for the West Bank, held by Jordan at that time, and for the Gaza Strip here, down here, held by the Egyptians. 19 years later, in 1967, there was a 6-day war where once again Israel responded to a coordinated attack and conquered actually a territory that was a triple of its initial territory. That's the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt and the Gaza Strip here, the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Okay. So altogether, this war ended very quickly, less than a week, with a big victory of Israel, but with a big burden as well that the territories brought with this victory. After the war, almost immediately, there was the UN Security Council resolution number 242, which said that at the earliest convenient time, Israel should withdraw from territories to boundaries that are secure and recognized. The Arab leaders convened in Khartoum, and they have a three-pronged decision taken, no recognition of the state of Israel, no peace with Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Now, just to get a kind of a balcony view of what we're talking about, this is Israel here, okay? And look, I mean, how surrounded we are by wherever you would like to point out. And this, you recognize? Right, okay. So it's, I mean, we make a lot of noise in proportion to the magnitude of the surface. Just a little bit zoom in to see what the West Bank is about, and the West Bank is this territory, plus minus 6,000 square kilometers. Okay, you can how much it is in acres. You can calculate. Anyway, distances from the green line, the armistice lines, to the centers of residence and business and everything in Israel, which more or less 80% of Israel is centered here, right? It's concentrated here around Tel Aviv. Here's Jerusalem. So what you see here is about 7 to 9 miles. Here about 10, 11 miles, and about 10 miles from side to side encircling Jerusalem. Now, I very quickly make a huge jump or a huge leap towards the beginning of the peace process, just in order to get in more details into this process. The process actually started after the first Gulf War by George Bush the father, 41st. Okay. He convened in Madrid all the leaders of the Arab world and Israel. And of course, you see here co-sponsors of the Madrid conference, Gorbachev, and the King, etc. So we have, all of them are here, and we start multilateral negotiations. But multilateral negotiations do not produce anything substantive, except for just talks, you know, talks on this, talks on that, but most of the time there's no real progress on any substantive matter. And behind the scenes, in 1992, just about less than a year after the Madrid conference, start backtrack negotiations between non-official Israelis and semi-officials and officials, PLO officials. And an agreement is signed, the Oslo Accords, which are breakthrough between Israel and the Palestinians, a mutual recognition, and a decision in principle that throughout the structure and architecture that I will detail in a minute, we have a process of no violence, negotiated kind of process, negotiated agreement process. And this is the first handshake between the late Prime Minister Rabin and the late Chairman Arafat, posted by President Clinton in September 1993. Now, the architecture of Oslo is a bit tricky. Because there was an agreement in principle, the Declaration of Principles, that was signed, as I said, in September 93, and then a series of interim stages and agreements, very complicated in terms of their contents, which I will point out in a minute. So we have the first stage, of course, is the signing of the Declaration of Principle. And then comes the first practical stage afterwards, interim self-government arrangements. which started with the Jericho and Gaza agreement, and then the interim agreement. This agreement is a volume of about 350 pages, comprising from elections to security, from security to the legal status, from the legal status to 40 civil spheres of interim governance. And the core issues, the most contentious and leaden issues, Jerusalem, the holy sites, the old city, refugees and the right of return, territory, boundaries, settlements, and security arrangements, the four core issues, Jerusalem, refugees, territory, and security, were tabled until a later stage. Okay? Permanent status agreement, let's say we are here, and this stage to begin no later than the third year of interim period. Meaning we start that in May 1996. But we did not. We did not, and we said to ourselves, architecturally or structurally, we said to ourselves, look, let's start feeling how it is to be coexisting together. Let's get acquainted to one another. Let's do some joint stuff together. Let's address the frictions between us, etc. And then let's do the serious stuff. Okay, let's tackle the serious stuff. However, what happened is that this reality, I'm showing a map of the West Bank, of course. What you see here are the 7 Palestinian cities. You see in kind of reddish here, okay? That's Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, Qalqiye, Ramallah, Jericho, Bethlehem, and Hebron. These are Area A. Area A is full Palestinian responsibility, civil responsibility, and security responsibility. The rest of the Palestinian population is within Areas B, which are the rural areas. Hundreds and hundreds of villages, little towns, little neighborhoods, etc., that are surrounded by Area C. Area C, the grayish part, is Israel. Now, in Area A, as I said, we have full responsibility of the Palestinians. In Area B, we have the Palestinian civil control or civilian control, and an Israeli overriding authority in terms of security. And the rest, of course, is Israeli. That's 60% of the territory, Area C, where all the strategic parts of, the security related strategic parts of the land is, and where all the settlements are. So imagine this for 3 years, let's say 5 years, okay? It's an impossible map. Every single square inch here is a friction detonator. Okay? So now imagine it, not for 3 or 4 or 5 years, while discussing and negotiating permanent status, but for now 21 years, since this is a regime that we live in the West Bank for the last 21 years, since 1995, September 1995. So, what happens next is a month and a half after the signing of the Oslo Interim Accords. The accords were signed on 28th of September 1995. Prime Minister Rabin, who was unequivocally the leader in those negotiations, and the one who took the most risky path with Shimon Peres, who passed away 2 days ago, as you all know, who was his colleague and very close partner in that endeavor. Prime Minister Rabin is assassinated in what is called now Rabin Square after a gala or a demonstration for peace on this square in Tel Aviv, in the heart of Tel Aviv. By the way, I live 2 minutes from there, walking slowly. Rabin is assassinated by this Israeli Jew called Yigal Amir. He's in jail, of course, and he's replaced by Shimon Peres. Now, many of you would ask, so what? I mean, life goes on. Life does not go on. Life does not go on. Okay. What happens is that this criminal derailed the locomotive of peace until these very days. Now, what would have happened had Rabin not been assassinated? I don't know. Maybe we would have been in the very same situation right now. I don't know. Nobody knows. But I think that this was a major, major factor for what happened later. What happened later is Prime Minister Netanyahu, you see how he likes the is elected in summer 1996, and contrary to his statements on what he will do, will he be elected, he respects and adheres to the Oslo agreements, to which he opposed when he was in the opposition. So, first thing, he signs the Hebron Protocol, and then he signs the White River Memorandum, which provides for the continuous process of allocating more responsibilities to the Palestinians, giving them a little bit of more land, like 13 point something percentages, and they all signed. They called King Hussein of Jordan, was very ill, was treated in Mayo Clinic, and was brought to Y by President Clinton in order to help out the very, very heated negotiations in Y. Anyway, Netanyahu immediately after returning back to Israel accuses the Palestinians of failing to honor all their security commitments and kind of takes a step back from the whole deal. Barak comes to power a year later, summer 1999, and he immediately engages in negotiations with the Palestinians, trying to merge this problematic architecture of interim and then permanent status negotiations into a coherent process of both interim and permanent, and put a timeline on this. And this is the signing of the Sharm el-Sheikh Memorandum on the 4th of September 1999, which for up to this date is the last agreement signed between Israelis and Palestinians. Okay, this was what? 17 years ago. That's the last agreement. It's a memorandum, a couple of pages, but that's the last document signed between the parties. Many actors are not with us anymore. Barak has grown a beard right now. I don't know if you saw him on television. Mubarak, of course, you know where he is. Chairman Arafat. Saeb Erekat became the Secretary General of the PLO. Madeleine Albright is always around, supporting very persistently the candidate Hillary Clinton. So, a year later, the Prime Minister Barak and Chairman Arafat are summoned to Camp David by President Clinton. And it's the first time, two delegations, small delegations, like including the leaders, 9 persons each, that's all. And throughout a period of about 2 weeks, chaired by President Clinton and his staff, his aides, and the secretary and the national security advisor, cracking heads on the core issues for the first time. Jerusalem is on the table. Refugees are on the table. Territory, settlements, withdrawals, etc. on the table, and of course security. But as you all know, this ended without an agreement, and maybe you would like to ask some questions about that. But to me, all parties committed a lot of mistakes, and nobody was without any imperfections or faults. But the main reason there was no agreement in Camp David is that Arafat just did not want an agreement. And this is not only me saying this; anyone who's been there, including Palestinians, very, very close to Arafat, say that. That was the main reason he was not prepared to do this one step towards becoming a statement rather than a revolutionary, popular, and very powerful leader of the Palestinians. And when he kind of when Clinton was about to leave office, Arafat called him to thank him and say, a great man. Clinton just replied and said, no, I'm not a great man. I'm a failure, and you're the reason for that. However, upon returning from this failed summit, the parties resumed negotiations silently, secretly. This is not too well known to the general public, not even in Israel or in Palestine. But Shlomo Ben-Ami, our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, and myself, Saeb Erekat, and Mohammed Dahlan held 54 daily sessions immediately upon returning from Camp David. And when we kind of reassembled this puzzle of understandings and possible convergences and possible agreements, and both parties said to themselves and to their respective leaders, this is good. We can solidly count on that to become the basis for an agreement. Barak and Arafat meet in September, 3 days before the breakup of the Al-Aqsa Intifada. And they kind of dispatch the negotiators, talking to Bill Clinton on the phone from Barak's residence, together, say, in a week's time, you go and finish the details. In a week's time, we will come and sign. Just to, as an illustration, this is a map that the Palestinians, we did not put a map on the table in Camp David, but this is a map that the Palestinians, according to our discussions, have published, and you see here what they understood from the negotiations, that actually they have three kind of cantons, okay? South, center, and north, cut by Israeli sovereignty, or at least passages throughout their territory. That's what they understood of the Camp David discussions. And as I said, towards the end of September 2000, the second Intifada breaks out, and there's a lot of bloodshed, hostilities, violence, retaliation, terrorism, a kind of a terrible period. Okay? I met yesterday at Harvard the former Prime Minister of Ireland, Bertie Ahern, okay? And he talked about the troubles, 68 to 98. It so reminded me of our situation, this intractable circle of bloodshed and hostilities. And still, despite that, Prime Minister Barak, leading a minority government, continued the negotiations. And we proceeded in meetings and in sessions of dialogue with the Palestinians. Then President Clinton, just about less than a month before leaving office, on the 20th of December 2000, lays out his parameters for peace. And he says the following. He meets with us at the White House, and he says the following: look, guys, you take this to your leaders. This is my best judgment as a president who was so deeply and compassionately involved in your negotiations. This is my best judgment on how should the basis for future negotiations look like. I'm giving it to you. Go back home, and within 3 days, get back to me by Wednesday, end of working hours. Get back to me with a yes or a no. Don't start to argue about this or that element or component in my judgment. Just say yes or no. Accept the perimeter of that, and let's discuss afterwards. The moment I'm out of the White House, on the 20th of January 2001, these are off the table forever. Now, the fact of the matter is that the Clinton parameters are very much valid today as they were 16 years ago. Okay. So they're not off the table, but they are a kind of an anchor that one could build on. I'm kind of running quickly on one of the options that President Clinton offered. That's not his map, that's a Palestinian map. But you see that this is a much more normalized kind of map, right? For whatever dimension you would like to judge this map. Very small annexation. You see 6% annexation and 3% of land swap, which was reflected within the Clinton parameters. It looks much better, I think, than the previous one. In January 2001, we reconvened in Taba. This is not a summit, because the leaders were not there. This is a big mistake that many historians make. There was no summit here. This was a conference that was held in order to allow for building some kind of a bridge that would channel us towards the change in government and in administration. Both in Israel, we were in the middle of an election campaign here for premiership, and in America, as Clinton was replaced by George W. Bush. So here's a the Israeli proposal in Taba. It resembles the former map, but we talk here about more or less 8% of the land, and a swap of land that would be more significant than the previous one. Then we're still under the Al-Aqsa Intifada, and 9/11, of course, happened half a year before, in 2001. So the Arab League convenes in Beirut and issued the Saudi initiative, the Arab Peace Initiative later on, called, which talks about normalization with Israel, of total normalization with Israel, end to all violent conflict and military means for resolving the conflict, resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by dividing the land back to 1967 borders, East Jerusalem for the Palestinians as their capital of Quds, and just an agreed solution to the Palestinian refugees. Just an agreed, okay? According to the UN General Assembly Decision 194. By the way, this plan, this Arab Peace Initiative, is still on the table. Reiterated almost every year since then in all the Arab League, whatever the Arab League is now, okay, after 2011. But this is very much still a framework that one could explore in a regional outlook of resolving the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Then comes a quartet comprising the US, the UN, the EU, and Russia, with George W. Bush roadmap. Once again, a framework for moving forward the peace process. But the very first stages of this are not implemented. That's halt to terrorism and incitement on the Palestinian side, and halt or stop or freeze of settlements on the Israeli side. Neither one happened. So we don't even cross the threshold to the second phase of the roadmap, which would have produced a Palestinian state in provisional boundaries. Israel builds the security fence against all the suicide bombers and the intrusions into Israel. Some call it the wall because in certain areas it's a wall, in fact. But in most of the itinerary, it's something like that. It's a long trajectory of fencing, but it did what it was supposed to do. It stopped the terrorism, Palestinian terrorism, in Israeli civilian centers. And many see this delineation as a possible political boundary eventually. That's about between 7.5 to 8.5% of annexation. In 2005, Prime Minister Sharon, in his second term, disengages unilaterally from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip, uprooting 8,500 people, settlers from the Gaza Strip. And, well, you see the kind of shootage that we saw when this happened within the Israeli community. That's the Gaza Strip enlarged, and the 17 settlements that were uprooted. And then towards the end of his second term, President Bush convenes the Annapolis Convention, the Annapolis Conference, and start a very thorough and serious negotiation process. Once again, that's the first serious one since Camp David 2000, so it's about almost 8 years in between the two, where the core issues of the permanent status were not negotiated. Prime Minister Olmert, currently in jail for corruption, and Chairman Abu Mazen, who is looking for a successor with not much will, met tete-a-tete with one another 34 times during that period, less than a year. And at the end of this process, Prime Minister Olmert presents Abu Mazen with Abbas, presents him with a comprehensive proposal. Abbas responds, "I'll get back to you." He did not. This was the most generous offer ever made by an Israeli prime minister. All along the road, we have many civil society initiatives, Israelis and Palestinians jointly, just name it. And many think tanks and institutions are working on plans and schemes and proposals and initiatives, etc. I happen to participate in kind of a large part of this initiative, but this one is the Blue White Future, which looks into the two-state solution as the solution for the conflict that needs to be gradually implemented. And by reaching out to the settlers and bringing them back home, or at least a large part of them, that's, I think, is part of what I'm going to present in a few minutes. We had these proximity talks, brought nothing. George Mitchell was here. He was much more successful with the Northern Irish conflict than he was here. Then, of course, we all know what happened in the Arab world during this period, from Libya to Yemen, from Yemen to Syria. There's someone would call it Islamic carnage rather than chaos, but the Arab Spring is not. The dust is not has not settled yet. And then a couple of operations that we do against Hamas provocations and violence against Israeli civilians, 2006, 2008, 2009, and 2014. Comes John Kerry, Secretary of State, and starts a new process in 2013, 9 months for a permanent status agreement altogether, resolving all the core issues in 9 months, which of course was from the outset not logical. Anyway, there's a very heavy pressure of the Palestinians on the international arena, international tribunals and all kinds of institutions, and looking for a United Nations Security Council resolution several times, according to certain initiatives, the French one, the New Zealand one, Palestinian one, Jordanian one. We'll see what will happen. And we call it, the international warfare. I won't detail everything here, but by the way, this could be distributed if you wish, Miriam, if anyone would like to.
We'll upload it. We'll upload
more details into this. It's yours. So, where do we go from here? First of all, let's put my strategic vision for Israel on the slide in order for us to be on the same page. What I'm looking for and what I think the Zionist vision has been in the last 120 years, since the first Jewish Congress in Basel, led by Theodor Herzl, It's a democratic national homeland for the Jewish people within secure boundaries alongside a viable, demilitarized Palestinian state. That's it. Looks simple, right? So how do we get there? Number one, I think that we've been dragged, cornered, responsive, and not initiating, not entrepreneuring, unlike all the other fields in which Israelis excel. In academy, in art, in high tech, in culture, in science, just name it. Here, we are not, I think, the best actors. And I would like Israel to initiate independently steps that would lead it to the achievement of this strategic objective of a Jewish democratic Israel in secure boundaries. So I would offer the following. Let's proceed. I don't see anything as mutually exclusive. I don't think that a regional outlook would be the miraculous resolution of this conflict would provide it. No. But we do have a lot in common with many moderate, relatively moderate Sunni countries and regimes. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states. And if we could create the common denominator of a certain Western/Sunni axis. We all are terrified by Iran, the hegemonial aspiration of Iran. We are all terrified by Daesh, IS, Hezbollah, Hamas, and all the allies of Iran and other fundamentalist Muslim non-state that are playing around us. And we have the same concerns. So why not engage in a dialogue on what we could do together in order to resolve the conflict? Could be within the Arab Peace Initiative context or another context, the roadmap, for instance. I also would like to see a track of bilateral negotiations, not just handshakes and photo opportunities at the UN General Assembly, but real negotiations between the leadership and the working level of the negotiators. And last but not least, an independent, proactive initiative of Israel to delineate its boundaries around a Jewish majority and a democratic regime. Because otherwise, the slope is inclined towards the one binational state that would be neither Jewish nor democratic. Could not be both. And I would see a gradual process rather than a one-off process of, full-scale resolution of the whole conflict. Let's do it gradually. First security and territory, then Jerusalem, then refugees. And let's structure something that would be leading or putting the infrastructure and the conditions for a two-state solution. So even if there is no solution, there is a reality of two states. And we create a reality that reverses the trend towards the one binational state. And we need a continuous process, binding, clear, hands-on. In Israel, within Israel, and also within the Palestinian society. None of them is perfect. Okay? We need an internal discourse. We need an internal dialogue We need to try and build a consensus between settlers and non-settlers, between the right and the left, between the periphery and the what we call Tel Aviv state. Okay. And of course, I'm talking about constructive unilateral steps that do not negate the two-state solution and that do not interfere with any negotiation process that could be taken. But in the absence of a negotiated agreement, or if negotiations do reach an impasse, which they will, of course, we have other means to stop the deterioration of both Israelis and Palestinians into a future that is everything but coexistence. It requires to take risks by the leadership, of course. I'm not a dreamer about peace. Okay? I know that peace now means for me security and democracy. That's all. All the rest will come in a generation, in 2 generations, in 3 generations, I don't know, down the road. I want my core values as the Jewish state to be incorporated within, or encompassed within my boundaries. This is why I need a boundary in a Middle East where boundaries boundaries of 100 years are effaced within 24 hours. And the two-state, for two people, is therefore an imperative for us, because we cannot govern another people of millions for 50 more years. We've been there 49 years now. Okay. This is something that, I've heard so many negotiators and leaders talk about it. South Africans, North Ireland leaders and negotiators. The options to go back to fighting one another and slaughtering each other is always open. Why not try another trick? And the last thing that I would like to talk about is the possibility of President Obama between November 9th and January 20th, 2017, laying out his legacy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. His parameters, much like his predecessors. President Clinton, President Bush. This is, as I'm hearing in the circles around President Obama, not out of the question. And he might even wish to coordinate, of course, with the elected president, laying out those parameters as a proposal or as a resolution draft in the United Nations Security Council. So all of this, I will end here, provides perhaps some hope that not all is finished. That's now I open it to questions.
Yeah, I'm curious, you made mention of coming to terms between settlers and I guess centrist Israelis, but I'm curious why you think there would be any hope in coming to terms with the settlers who are committed to their project and committed to their communities, and who, it seems to me that a lot of the weird map making, right, in previous agreements were designed to protect the settlers, to secure the settlers' place.
Mm-hmm.
If negotiators hadn't needed to worry about the settlers, let's just say in an ideal universe, they could move them wherever they want to move them, right? Would the maps have looked as weird? With the finger, like the Ariel's family, that big finger going to the town of Ariel, et cetera, et cetera. Because it seems to me that that's a major blockage in any kind of coherent map making that negotiators want to make?
Okay, so first let me tell you that the settlers are not a monolithic society. There are ideological settlers, there are extremist settlers, and there are moderate, let's say, standard of living settlers. I've been talking to the most extreme rabbis in the settlements. I'm talking real extreme. I mean, nobody stands on their right-hand side. Okay, they're most extreme. I'm discussing this with them. What would happen if a decision is taken, if an agreement is signed, if the government of Israel that you did not elect decides to cut the land instead of cutting the people, decides to withdraw from the vast majority of the territories. By the way, I'm not talking about uprooting 500,000 settlers. I'm talking about uprooting up to 100,000, which are located outside or eastwards of the settlement blocks. The main settlement blocks comprise more or less 80% of the settlers. Okay. So you don't have to think about the very large numbers. So what the rabbis tell me is the following: we will mourn, we will pray, and we will pack and go. Okay. Now, they might be just talking, but to the best of my knowledge and to the best of our findings in surveys that we done in Blue and White Future for the last 7-8 years, about 30 to 35% of those who are bound to be relocated would go without hesitation and are ready to say that now. So just imagine what happens in a settlement where a third is gone out, it's gone west. What happens to the kindergartens, to the classes of primary school, to the health services, to the security in this place. And what I think should be done, and it's not me thinking about it that way, but former Supreme Court Judge Netanyahu-Abbas, who was at the head of the inquiry committee that was set up by the Israeli parliament to review the disengagement from Gaza. And the main recommendation of this 500-page report, 2010, says the following: the Prime Minister, you, no other, you, the Prime Minister, whoever you are, at the head of the governmental power, need to start now planning on a national scale the relocation of 100,000 people, because this could happen, and the prices that the people will pay if you do not prepare carefully, meticulously, and thoroughly the relocation of 100,000 people would be a traumatic event in too many dimensions. So start now. Okay. So what I call for is, first, yes, a national planning for the relocation of up to 100,000 settlers. Yes, do it now. Secondly, a statement by an Israeli Prime Minister. Israel has no long-term sovereignty claims eastwards of the settlement blocks. Thirdly, legislation of a voluntary evacuation, compensation and relocation law that would allow those who wish to move now to do it, get a compensation for their property, and move westwards. Then a security plan for this transitional period in which certain settlements are still in and others have already moved westwards, which means that the IDF will have to stay with a different footprint, with a different kind of operational model, but will have to stay until an agreement is reached. All this, what I said, does not negate negotiations. And the settlers were never the obstacle in the negotiations. If you ask me, the main sticking point in the negotiations until now, in all the rounds that were conducted, Jerusalem and the refugees. Not territory, not security, not water. Okay. So I'm not concerned with that. That's not my main concern. Yes, please.
With respect to security, do you foresee any change within the country of Iran by the people at all that would bring about a shift in the government's attitude?
I'm not sure that I get your question right. Changing attitude of which government?
Iranian government.
Towards Israel?
Right.
I know that some analysts do see that. I think that the majority of the experts on Iran, both in Israel and in the United States, do not see a change coming soon. But they do think that there are trends in the civil society in Iran, undercurrents, that are leading towards a more open, a more modern, and a more empathic sentiment towards Israel. This is nothing, it's not factual. These are analysis. Our test is in 7 years, whether when Obama is no longer here, and the breakout is possible towards Saddam, and maybe a situation in which at a certain point in time the United States cannot respond because of other problematic constraints that it has globally. Then I see the Iranians trying to break out towards a bomb. So whether the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be still there as it is now or not, it would be irrelevant, in my opinion, if they decide to do so. Sorry.
So what about the other two?
Which one?
Jerusalem and the refugees.
Okay, that's easy. On Jerusalem, look, Jerusalem comprises today 850,000 people, residents. More or less a third Israeli Jews, about secular and traditional, a third religious and Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, and a third Palestinians. About almost 300,000 people are Palestinians within the jurisdiction of the municipality of Jerusalem, which is huge. I think that for Jerusalem, what Olmert offered, what we discussed with President Clinton after his Clinton parameters, is the division of Jerusalem, so that the Jewish neighborhoods, the 12 Jewish neighborhoods that were built post-1967, become part of Yerushalayim, the Jewish Jerusalem. The Arab neighborhoods become part of Palestinian Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and the old city is governed by a special regime that is neither Israeli nor Palestinian, much like the British Mandate, if you will, okay, something like that. With a special governance system, a special law enforcement system, and a special dispute resolution system. This model was developed by a group of former Canadian diplomats with hundreds of experts and analysts during about 7 years, and presented at the presented in Washington D.C. in 2010. You can Google that. It's called JOCI, the Jerusalem Old City Initiative, and this is the model that that provides for the most disputed and unique place in the world, the old city of Jerusalem, 870 dunams altogether, to be deferred for 50 years, 500 years, just name it. Prime Minister Olmert in 2008 adopted this concept, and that's what he offered of us. Vision of Jerusalem, you have your Al-Quds, we have our Jerusalem with a large and solid Jewish majority for generations to come, and the old city, some kind of an international regime over it, a special regime over it. Refugees will not be resettled in Israel. The right of return will be applicable only in Palestine once established. We might, on a case-by-case basis, accept the entrance of a very, very small number, symbolic number of a couple of thousand. Family reunification, humanitarian considerations, this kind of stuff. We will participate, Israel will participate in an international effort to rehabilitate the Palestinian refugees and compensate them. There will be a process that will be processing their claims, etc., and compensating whoever is eligible for compensation. There might be a rehabilitation in their current places of residence or in third countries that would host them. But mind you, there is currently a huge number of refugees and displaced persons in the world. 65 million. So the Palestinian refugeeism, it's not the first priority right now of the globe. I can tell you that in private conversation with all the leaders of the Palestinian Authority throughout the years, I've never heard even a single one telling me, look, we are going to implement the right of return into Israel proper. None of them aspires to for this to happen. Okay. So, for what it's worth, we are out of time.
We are, Gilead. But
Okay.
join me in thanking Gilead.
Thank you.
For coming soon.
Okay. Thank you. Good job.